All right, we continue on into our third hour of live streaming. You're the beginning of our third hour of live streaming.
So you're fresh. Like, this isn't, you're not dying yet. You're still feeling pretty good.
When we get into that 10:15 call with Patrick here at the end, it's pretty much going to be Patrick carrying us to the end of the show. I can feel it. So thanks for coming by.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is Ben Kuchera, now of Polygon.com. Mm-hmm. It's always interesting. So I told him, I was like, oh, Ben Kuchera from Polygon's coming. He's like, oh, he lives near here? I was like, yeah, actually lives in Cincinnati. We used to work at Electronics Boutique together in the Florence Mall.
See, I thought, and my wife was like, oh, it's an old retail friend. I thought, didn't you used to work at the toy store?
I worked holiday at KB Toys.
Okay.
Yeah. But I definitely
back when that existed.
Yeah, when that was a thing. When retail existed, really. So we go back a long way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Electronics Boutique. Yeah, that was a long time ago.
So for the younger viewers out there, Electronics Boutique was a video game retailer that ultimately became EB Games.
Yep.
That was purchased by GameStop.
That's right.
And now it's all GameStop, right? It's 100%.
It's all GameStop.
None of these stores exist. It's just...
Did anybody buy Babbage's? Okay.
GameStop.
Of course.
Babbage's and Funcoland.
All went into the same thing?
It all went into the same thing. Remember when you went into a Funcoland and they had the printout?
Yeah.
Of a list of every single game that existed and how much you could make for bringing it in.
There was... one of my best friends was a manager at Video Game on Mall Road, and this is while we were in high school, and this tells you about the state of retail, because he was a senior in high school, maybe a freshman in college, and he was the manager of the store.
He was running shit.
He was running it all.
No wonder they didn't succeed.
Yeah, and all we would do, I was a year younger than him, we would all show up after school and we would just play video games all day, because they had they were a used shop, right?
And they had
you could just plug in anywhere, and we would just sit on the counter, literally sit on the counter and play games. And looking back, it's that's the worst shopping experience if you're an adult to go into a store where there's a bunch of 17 to 19-year-old kids just sitting around playing games, ignoring you for hours at a time.
And then one of them jumps up and tries to sell you something. It's like, oh, you're actually an employee. You're getting paid for this time.
And when we did lots of the stuff where people would bring in games to trade that were really rare, and we would just buy them from them instead of getting them to the store.
No, yeah. The whole just give them cash. We're doing a cash deal right now for
Final Fantasy
unopened
3
copy of Panzer Dragoon Saga.
Oh, yeah, no, we've definitely
got that. Right?
So, what do you do now?
So right now, technically my job title is Senior Editor of Opinion. So I run the opinion section. I have people write freelance stuff. We do developers writing stories about the industry. I do a lot of op-eds and that sort of thing. My secondary and kind of moving into my primary job right now as things get closer to retail is virtual reality.
Right.
Mostly due to the fact I've been a virtual reality enthusiast my whole life. I've gone to, CES for years and years and years where everyone was like, oh no, we have the virtual reality headset. And then you go and you test it out and it's garbage. And this was going on for years and years and years until finally I was given a demo by a young man, an up-and-comer by the name of John Carmack.
I've heard of him.
He's done some
stuff.
He's got a bright future ahead of him. And
was this at CES or at QuakeCon?
This was at QuakeCon. This was the first demos they were doing at QuakeCon. And I told them before I put on, this was the duct tape demo they had with the Oakley straps of the Oculus Rift. And I told him, I was like, this is where I refuse to be hopeful anymore, because I always put it on and look around and it's terrible. He was like, no, we've cracked it. And then I tried it. And I was like, yeah, this is super good. What are you doing with it? He was like, we don't actually own this. It's a kid named Palmer Luckey and another guy named Nate Mitchell. He was like, let me hook you up. So that evening we had this 2-hour dinner. This was before Oculus was barely a company, before the Kickstarter. And I had a long conversation about all the challenges and opportunities of VR, and they were incredibly smart. They had good answers to my questions, and they were smart enough when I had a question they didn't have an answer for, they would tell me. Yeah. They're like, no, we have to probably partner with someone, manufacturing is going to be hard, finding the panels. I left and backed the Kickstarter 2 days later, which paid off in the end.
I did the same thing.
Yeah.
I did the same thing.
I think that we're getting the Kickstarter edition.
Did we have to do that at QuakeCon? I'm trying to remember if they opened it up the Kickstarter at QuakeCon or if it was right after.
This could be my memory revising the story, but I vaguely remember leaving that meeting. hotel room and backing it.
Right.
Like I
think that sounds right.
It was all happening right there. And since they were purchased by Facebook, we had Valve go into it with the Vive Pre. And do you want to talk about the hardware? We have one.
We do. So yes, I do. So we're getting really close to all this stuff being out now. We got the Rift. This is the HTC Vive.
This is not the HTC Vive. This is the HTC Vive Pre.
Okay, all right.
So they did a developer's kit, which I've had a chance to play with a little bit, and it was a little bit janky. It worked very well, but it was tricky. You could tell if you squeezed it too hard, like the controllers would creak. Yeah. This was something they had to make a lot of quickly. The Vive Pre is the second.
Here you go. We got a shot right about here.
We'll give it one of these.
There you go.
This is the second version of the development kit, and this is supposed to be relatively close to what we're going to see in retail. But
this is what they've been doing the demos on at CES and stuff recently.
This is the big thing that they've sent a bunch of them to the press, which is how I have one.
Right.
So most major outlets now have an HTC Pre that we're able to demo games and get a sense for the hardware. This I think is where the magic of the controller or of the system is.
Yeah.
These are the motion sensing controllers. So you don't play most Vive games with a controller.
Like an Xbox controller or whatever.
You hold these and you're able to manipulate things in 3D, and it has full tracking. It has wrist straps that you absolutely should use.
We'll talk about that in a bit.
So yeah, these are the controllers that really, I think, provide a ton of what makes the Vive so special, because since they come with every single unit, developers are comfortable developing.
That's a good point.
So almost everything that has been released, there's a little, when you get your press code for the Vive Pre, and you put it in the HTC site, and then they ship you one, you put the same code into Steam, and it unlocks kind of like, it's a series of that developers can push to the press if they want to share their work.
Gotcha.
So right now I think I have around 28 things downloaded, which is a combination of experiences and like levels of games and demos and early access works in progress. And almost to a one they use the motion sensing controller.
In terms of using this, in terms of using these as controllers, do they have enough inputs for what you think they're trying to do?
So there's the touchpad at the top.
Right. Which is similar. If you've used a Steam controller, it's the same idea as that.
And there's haptics, so when you like rub your, you can kind of feel it.
Right.
And a lot of games are like chopping that into fourths, so if you click right, left, it turns it into a D-pad.
D-pad of sorts. Okay.
There's a trigger where you would expect a trigger to be. There's a lot of games that basically model a gun, so you're just holding it out, pulling the trigger.
Right.
There are two buttons on the side that operate like a squeeze. Squeeze it, and that's a control.
Here.
There's a button on top and a menu button at the bottom.
Okay.
So I haven't wanted 4 buttons so far, and when you consider that you're holding 2 of these, so you can make each trigger do something different, you can make each touchpad do something different. It's pretty intuitive to get a sense for it, and there are a lot of buttons, but when you pick it up, it all makes sense. It's kind of interesting because when you tell someone, oh, hit the button underneath the touchpad, they can't look down and see it really. There's in the loading program, there's actually a floating virtual version of the hardware. Yeah. But it's hard,
but your finger's not over it.
Yeah, and you can't like point to it and have them see it because you're not tracked.
Yeah.
The other fascinating thing, and what kind of blew my mind, is if you can see on the hardware, there's nothing down here. I don't know if the camera can see that. This is just a piece of plastic. When you look at the controller in reality, that turns into a battery indicator. So there's no battery indicator on the external hardware. But when you put the headset on and look at it, you will see a row of green lights that tell you how much battery you have left.
That's pretty good.
So they saved like $2 by not putting little LEDs on there, full functionality. And there are games when you look down, you see a sword, or you see a gun, or you see just a different floating-looking controller. In virtual reality, as long as they model the bottom part, they can make the whole thing look however they want, which is super cool in practice.
Yeah.
Very hard to explain because people don't really believe it they try it.
Right.
But it works. There's a version of it's basically Fruit Ninja trademark called Ninja Training, which is not affiliated with Half Brick. I don't believe in any way, which is why it's called Ninja Training. And it just turns the one controller into a sword, and you're just sitting there slicing at fruit. That's the entire game, and I've spent hours on it because it turns out very accurately modeling a katana and trying to hit like a flying lemon is just a whole lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Like if you had infinite resources, you could get your own katana and have a person just throw lemons up in the air.
Just hoist a watermelon.
Now when you're doing it, are you one controller
just
or
one?
Two? Okay.
And you can put the other one down, or you can just hold it.
Okay.
Yeah. And like some people have taken like a Nerf katana and like duct taped it, so you get that weight, which is dangerous. Like you can
because it doesn't exist in the
because it doesn't exist. Yeah. There's a super good game called tennis, where you're playing tennis against yourself. And you just throw the ball and you hit it, and then it warps you to the other side. Oh. You're not trying to knock the tennis ball away from your opponent. You're trying to keep it...
You should volley as long as you can.
Right. So the whole idea is to hit it accurately enough that you can return it.
Okay.
The problem is it's very easy when you're using these controllers to hit it up high, and then you want to jump and give it one of these, and you smash your ceiling. And I've done that about 3 times.
So I do want to let's bring that up now. If we look at this particular controller, there seems to be a little bit of damage.
It's battle damage.
And I saw an editorial that you posted with a video as well, talking about some of the potential pitfalls of using this.
It's tricky, and it's tricky even if you use the wristband, because if you're playing a demo where you're standing in front of a table, and it's a virtual table, and let's say all of these objects are virtual, you're using the controller in the virtual world, and you pick up an item, and you put it down, and you pick up an item, and you put it down, and you pick up an item, and you put it down, you begin to understand the physics of that table.
Right.
The problem is, then your phone rings, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to put the controller down, and you try to put the controller down, and it turns out that
there's no table there.
Really exist, and your controller goes tumbling down. I have people like, oh, just wear the wrist straps. But then you get so lost in the simulation, you think you're taking the controller off. So you're like, I'm going to remove the wrist strap and then set the controller down, and it just falls straight to the floor.
I mean, you even mentioned that like sometimes you try to lean on something that is only there virtually.
You don't realize until you're working with a virtual table that feels real inside the game how much you interact with tables in front of you. You put your hands down, you put your coffee on it, which is fine until you try to just lean over and put the entirety of your weight on it. And
man.
There is nothing that can match the pure panic, because you're so sure of yourself.
Right.
If you like lean over and put all your weight on a desk, you don't hold any of the movement back thinking, I might have to save myself.
Right.
And so you get that moment of pure panic as you realize there's nothing there and your face is going to hit the ground. There's nothing you just take it on the wrists, you take it on the face, you look ridiculous. And this has happened to me twice so far.
I was going to say, is there battle damage on this from that? Or have you braced yourself?
I've been saving myself with my wrists. I have just enough time to bring my hands down and not totally hurt myself. But yeah, there's even a warning in the instructions about virtual objects are not real. Do not put weight on them. Do not think you can put something down in real life. I laughed at it until it happened. Now I want to just get the word out. You think things are real, and you can hurt yourself. It's really cool, I guess. That the simulation is that real.
Yeah.
And it does take once or twice before you become hyper aware of like, okay, I can't actually set something down.
I saw a video just on Twitter of somebody who had modeled their apartment in the Vive so that they could walk around parts of it as long as the cables were, right? And like sit down on their couch because the couch was modeled in their apartment and get up.
But what?
I don't know what the purpose of that is unless you only want to live inside the headset.
I guess it's interesting in that the virtual version will always be clean. So you could just be living in like object filth and not realize it because you have
that's a good plan.
The virtual version of it, like, I can't see.
I mean, we're pretty close.
You just model better furniture.
Right.
Like you just make furniture out of like 2x4s and plywood, and then you model a nice couch that you.
I can almost feel the rich leather. And it's like
rich Corinthian leather.
The rich Corinthian leather.
What about comfort on this? Is this something where I mean, we have a DK1, we have a DK2 here. I've heard some people say that the Vive tends to be more front heavy than the Oculus Rift. Do you feel like this is comfortable to use for
it is a little
extended
bit
period?
Front heavy, and if you can kind of like get a sense for that, it sits higher on your head, the straps do, than other VR headsets.
Okay.
And just like everything when it comes to something that literally rests on your face, I said the same thing when we played with like the Avigant Glyph, which is a little home theater that looks like a Geordie LaForge type of situation that you just flip down. Anything you hold over your face, spend 10 to 20 minutes on the front end fiddling with it. Because everyone wears it slightly different. Everyone has a slightly different face. You may wear glasses. You may wear contacts. There's adjustments over here. There's adjustments back here. You can change how the strap kind of rests on your head.
Okay.
So I find it very comfortable, but there is also, if you can check this out, these pop, and then when you twist it, the entire mechanism inside moves back and forth.
Oh,
if you can move it
so the lenses and the screen.
If you can move it all the way towards your face, you're given a slightly better field of view. If you move it away, you have slightly more room for your glasses.
Okay.
I kind of crunch my glasses a little bit because I like that extra 10 maybe degrees of field of view, and then you snap it back.
Yeah,
there's
it locks
also
it in place.
there's also a little knob down here which is interpupillary distance. So you just twist that, and it's actually linked to the software, so it'll tell you exactly on the screen what your interpupillary distance is. So if you don't have a glasses prescription, it might, and you're really, really, really into VR, and you're going to get an $800 Vive, it might be worth going to an optometrist and just like, hey, real quick, can you measure my interpupillary distance? I know there's even printouts you can do online and hold up to your mirror and kind of roughly do it.
Okay.
But if you adjust the lenses, adjust the interpupillary distance, spend some time on the straps, once you do all of that and have it set up personally the way you like it, the technology disappears. Like, I've done 3-hour sessions before.
Yeah.
Felt very strange coming out of it just because I was in virtual reality for 3 hours. But in terms of comfort, it didn't. I was able to lose myself in the experience for that long without thinking that like, oh, it's chafing back here, or like, man, I would really love to keep playing, but like I have this crushing headache or there's pressure on my temples. That doesn't happen.
That's been, the problem I've had is because all the stuff I've seen has been demos, right? Where you have 4 minutes or 10 minutes, and like you want to get it on and you want to start the thing. You don't want to spend that 10 minutes kind of setting things up. So I can see that being like a very important step for people to realize when you get this. Don't just jump in and go. If you want it to be a positive experience, and that's really part of our whole deal here is with the VR side. So let's talk about hardware stuff for a second, like PC hardware. The minimum specs for the Vive and the Rift are essentially the same. Would you recommend that people try to overshoot those minimum requirements, or do you think the type of content in the games you're seeing, a minimum spec system is really going to produce the best experience, or a good enough experience, not the best?
There are demos I have, and I'm running a 980 Ti in my system, so like this is not an inexpensive part.
No.
Unless you go, I mean, there are video cards above that, correct? But we're starting to get into like...
No, there's no single GPU higher than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, I've topped off what you can do with a standard GPU.
Right.
And there are still demos where the frame rate chugs. And I don't even know if these are going to be released to the public. They're clearly unoptimized. It's things that Oculus or companies like Epic were showing on monster rigs where it's not an issue.
Right.
All of the kind of consumer-facing games I've played where ultimately people like you or I are going to buy this for $20 or $30 and play the game, they're being very aware of how much power they need, and they're trying to optimize. And you have games, there's a game called Budget Cuts, which is like, it's a very Portal-esque experience. You can you shoot a little ball and then you warp to it and you can throw knives and kill robots. It's a super cool game, and I have a very short demo kind of showing off the mechanics.
Right.
And it's very basic. It's all like flat shaded polygons and very simple models. And when you see it on a screen, it's like, yes, this is a very simply rendered game. When you put the Vive on, you don't think about it graphically. Everything feels so solid and the physics engine is so good. You're not in there going, man, I wish the textures were better. You just believe the reality.
Huh.
So I'm always fascinated, and a lot of games with the Gear VR are similar, where they go with a stylized route, but the head tracking and the tech is so good. You enjoy the reality of what you're seeing, and you're not worried about like, oh, it would be super great to have slightly better textures.
Interesting.
That being said, 90 frames a second isn't a suggestion. Like anything below that, if something is way more advanced than your graphics card and the frame rate starts to chug, you will get sick very quickly.
Okay, so that is
right.
It's not just like 90-ish.
Right.
You want to be 90.
You have to be at 90 or give yourself some overhead there.
Okay.
And part of that is on developers to make sure this stuff is optimized. But yeah, you have to hit this spec, and I do think going over a little bit will be helpful.
Right.
And it's important to understand there's nothing keeping you from playing any of these games. If you have a 5-year-old system with integrated graphics,
they're not going to lock you out.
Right. You can still like download things, try it, and have a terribly sickening experience.
Yeah.
But there's nothing that will be like, oh, no, your computer can't handle it, you can't run it. You know, like Windows does. But this is unsigned, and
right.
I don't know if they're going to have something like that, but no one's going to keep you from running something. The other thing is, if people are, and we talked about this a little bit on Twitter, that the Oculus tool is kind of misleading, right?
It's basically a spec check, but if it doesn't know your hardware, it kind of just defaults to yes or no. I mean, that's what you had on yours, right?
So I have, and I'm trying to remember the model of CPU. I'd have to look it up. It's an older CPU. It's like a 4-year-old part.
It's like a 2600K,
yeah,
something like that.
It's
But you had it
i7,
overclocked.
But it's so when Oculus brought up a list of parts, it just saw that CPU and said, that's old. Like you're not VR ready. And then I ran the Valve tool, which actually renders a scene and does real-world testing and tests your GPU and your CPU and tests for frame rate and really kind of stresses your system. And they stress, this is good, we're testing for the Vive, we're testing for the Rift, we're testing for everything. My system was like above a 10 on that.
Right.
And because it looked at the real world, it's like, yeah, your CPU is overclocked to hell. It really handled this scene well. You have a way overpowered GPU for most of the experiences. You're like way better than fine.
Right.
So run them both and really compare and think about the hardware. There's not a single hit a button, get a good answer yet. You do have to put some time into it.
Right. And I mean, and that's for our standpoint as hardware evaluators, performance analysis, all that type of stuff. The whole VR thing is really going to change things for us because the performance analysis, for us, it's like going to like play the game, and if your frame rate is above 90, you're good to go, right? Like, is it a pass fail? Are we going to do anything more detailed than that? And are the game developers going to allow us to like run the test with the type of tools we want without having to utilize this? Like, can we just run it kind of locally and run the types of tests that we're looking to find? I think it'll be interesting. Like we have some VR builds planned. I know we have some discussions to have about VR builds still. And I think for the rest of March and beyond, people that demo this for the first time at a friend's house and go, well, I have to have that. I need to upgrade my machine. That's going to be a very interesting pathway for people.
I had a meeting with NVIDIA at CES, and I was like, what is it like being in the GPU business at the launch of VR? It just grins.
Oh, yeah.
They're like,
absolutely.
it turns out this is a really great time to be in PC hardware, and to be offering GPUs and to have different options. It's everyone who's enthusiastic about VR is upgrading right now. They're getting their rig ready. They're making sure they hit this specs. We have solid information on what you need.
Yeah, it was like when 4K displays started to come out, right? And NVIDIA and AMD loved it because this is how we can sell high margin, high dollar parts. VR, I think, be more impactful on the GPU side of things than 4K was. I still think 4K is just started starting out, right? But the demands of this, and especially since the hardware vendors themselves, HTC, Oculus, well, not Samsung, I guess, on the PC side, but they're very adamant about you need to have good hardware to get that done.
And they're not messing around. Like, you have, I forget what the exact resolution the Vive is running at.
I don't remember either.
It's pretty high.
It's high.
But you have to render the scene for both eyes in that resolution at 90 frames a second.
Yep.
So you're looking at a high-res image, rendered stereoscopically, pushed to 2 different eyes, 90 frames.
Yeah.
So if you play a game on like a 3D display, you're looking at the same kind of amount of performance because you have to render each frame twice.
Right.
So there's things they can do in the drivers, and I'm sure there's things that companies like NVIDIA are looking at to kind of cheat frames or something. But for right now, you need to throw so much power at this to hit that 90 frames a second.
They're doing things like, trying to figure out how I can explain this, multi-viewport rendering, where basically the center of your screen maintains its highest resolution for rendering because that's where you're focusing, but the peripheral, because your peripheral vision is already bad.
Foveated rendering.
They kind of lessen the amount of work required on the edges, saving you horsepower, allowing you to get higher frame rates, and that's a trick that NVIDIA's been working on, trying to get implemented. I know it's implemented in the Unreal Engine, but I don't know where else.
There are hardware that's out there for demo that people are trying to get off the ground, where there's an inward-facing camera, and it tracks your eye. It's called foveated rendering. And like you say, it only renders where your eyeball's looking.
Right.
Because it's so interesting when hardware and software starts really digging into how your brain works. When I'm looking at you, you're in high resolution. There's a box behind you. I can't read it.
Right.
Your eye's taking in all that information, but that's very low res back there. And then I can look over and see what it is.
Yep.
It's a vinyl for Star Wars, The Rebel Mission to Ord Mantell.
Yeah.
That's a thing that exists. Okay, cool. So the software is hoping to take advantage of that. You're looking is incredibly high resolution, and then if you look over there, it dumps the resolution, and it operates fast enough that you get a lot of that performance back, and it's invisible to your eye. It just feels like how you perceive reality.
Not that type of thing. They didn't change rendering, but at CES, there was a demo. What was it? Tobii, T-I-I, did eye tracking on a laptop.
Yeah, there's a little bar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they showed, like, they didn't change rendering, but the aperture of the light would change based on if you're looking into the dark side of the scene or the light side of the scene. And it was really cool, and it worked very quickly. I could see it being applied to rendering resolution just as easily.
And there's demos on the Tobii technology where it actually will capture the gameplay and then show you where you were looking, which I think is absolutely fascinating. There's like two little red circles.
Yeah.
So that when you're like, if you're playing StarCraft 2, you can see like what people are looking at and what they're focused on.
It's really interesting.
And you don't realize until you look at something like that how much your eyes dart around at the screen. It feels like you can just relax and play a video game, where in reality, your brain and your eyes are constantly like in jerking really quick motions. It's fascinating to see.
If anybody watching has questions for Ben, you can put them in the chat here. Just tag me in the question so it'll show up on my screen, and I'll keep track of those. What about the Gear VR?
We have one of those right here.
So,
I'm just gonna
slide it off the side of the table. So my initial gut instinct for this, and you kind of already have tried to correct me on this, is that this doesn't offer a good enough experience for somebody's first VR experience, as opposed to somebody trying to use something like the HTC Vive.
It's really fascinating to me that we have tiers of VR, right? Like, as someone who's followed VR for, over 10 years professionally, and my whole life just as someone who thinks this tech is cool and saw Lawnmower Man as a kid and that was their formative experience.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me that we can sit here and talk about all these different forms of hardware. So, like, the entry level is the cardboard, right? Those the little goofy things that Google gives out. And, like, I think there's even one in a Happy Meal now.
Yes,
or you can,
I saw
like,
that.
turn your fry box into one.
The Happy Meal twists and fold, and then you put your phone in it, and there you go, 3D.
Absolutely.
McDonald's can do it.
Coca-Cola has one where if you get, like, the 12-pack of soda cans, you can fold it down. It's neat. It like cardboard to me feels like a parlor trick.
Yeah.
Oh, and we have one over here. Like they're literally just little cardboard viewers. And people are like, "What do you think of these?" I don't like them. It's like it uses nothing but the sensors in your phone.
Right.
So it's very high latency. It's relatively low resolution.
If you thought you looked weird with that, imagine walking around just holding this to your face.
And you can't. There's no straps. It's meant to be like a Viewmaster experience. In fact, Viewmaster has a toy for kids that operates as a cardboard viewer. I have one, and it's goofy in my collection of weird-ass cardboard implementations. So when you go from that, which I don't think is a great VR experience, even though Google is clearly invested, I think we're going to see a much bigger platform from them in custom hardware. Yeah. So, and then the step up from that is Gear VR, which is, it's powered by your phone. So you just snap your phone in there for the screen and everything, and you're good to go. That's the entirety of the experience. It's untethered, so you can...
That I like a lot.
Yeah, so you can, when you're wearing it, you can spin 360 degrees. You can do the past few cameras around. It's very comfortable. It's a $100 device if you already have the phone.
Right.
And of course, it uses Samsung's flagship phones from 2015 up. So like the S6, the S6 Edge, the latest Galaxy.
They just announced the S7 and the S7 Edge, and you get one of these for free if you pre-order. I think, is it through March? Something like that.
Well, it comes out on the 13th, I think. So if you pre-order, you have to pre-order before.
If you pre-order, you get this for free, which is obviously do that.
A great...
Like if you're going to get a phone.
Samsung, I think, actually makes great Android handsets. I really like the Galaxy line. I like a giant phone that I can read on and do the whole thing. So do that, because this is an incredible VR experience. The latency is way lower with the cardboard. Because if you don't do any of the deals and you buy one for $100, people are like, it's a plastic shell. And that's kind of right. It's a plastic shell with the optics in it. Mm-hmm. But motion tracking hardware is in here and not your phone.
Okay.
Because your phone's gyroscopes and accelerometers are good for moving your phone around and the little haptic things that Android and iPhone handsets do.
Right.
They're not up to the demands of workable VR.
Okay.
So when you play this and you get way better tracking hardware in the Gear and you put it on and you move it around.
That makes sense. Okay.
With the way lower latency, with all the better tracking, it's a way better VR experience. If Google Cardboard is at a 2, this is a 7. And then Vive is a 10.
Okay.
The problem is there's no depth sensing. So if I'm wearing this and I try to lean forward, it doesn't do anything. It's pure movement.
Okay.
And there's obviously no hand controllers yet. Everything is done through either a Bluetooth controller or there's a little, I don't know if you can see this, there's a swipe touchpad on the side.
Oh,
and
yes.
almost all of it's just a tap to select something, or you move it back and forth and up and down to select things.
Okay.
And there's a lot of games where it's purely gaze-based, where you just look at a button for a second and then select it.
It's kind of like the Kinect, hold your hand there.
But it works, is the difference. So I think the Gear VR, if you have a flagship Samsung handset, there's no reason not to buy it. There's great games for it. It's super fun to there's an Oculus video app where you can stream Twitch on an IMAX screen. So you're in this amazing movie theater by yourself and you can watch any Twitch stream you want.
Yeah. That's pretty good.
It's super fun to watch.
I remember when I borrowed, I think I borrowed this from you when I had the Note 4, and there was a movie theater viewer where it had a red curtain that comes away and you're sitting in seats essentially, and
And you can rent movies through there. You can sideload your content, so you can rip your copy of Jurassic World, put it in here, and be watching it on a plane.
Have you ever done that? Have you ever used this on a plane?
Yes, it is. I did it once, and I learned that etiquette in virtual reality is something no one is familiar with, and it's super strange, and you figure out the rules really quickly.
Yeah.
So on a plane, if you're wearing a virtual reality headset, be aware that no one's going to know what it is. They don't know what you're looking at. And if you're playing a very active game, if you think about a plane seat, you're basically sharing elbow space.
Right.
Imagine trying to read a magazine and the person next to you is doing this. You're leaning behind and trying to and playing like a fast-paced action game. It's rude. It doesn't work. It makes other people very uncomfortable, as I learned very quickly. So, like, things like the movie viewing, where you can just, like, sit back and you're only moving your head a little bit.
Yeah.
It's more comfortable.
Sure.
People with that. So I've watched movies. You can hold the button and select a pass-through camera that uses the built-in camera so you can see through it. And I talked to the flight attendant through that way. And I was like, yeah, can I just get a can of ginger ale? They had no idea. Like, the idea
That's
that
hilarious.
you
That's
can
awesome.
see them, but they can't see your eyes is so unsettling.
Yeah.
Or, like, when I was wearing it and I saw the flight attendant look at me for, like, 5 whole seconds trying to figure out, do I act as if this person is sleeping?
Right,
And,
right.
like, don't rouse them because or do I, like, tap them on the shoulder and,
sure.
Or, like, there's no protocol for this stuff
That's pretty good.
in public yet. So a lot of people, we were at GDC, I think, last year, and a lot of people had Gear VRs. And people aren't shy about coming up and asking to use it. Like, you see people, like, talking, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna go over there. It's like, hey, do you mind if I, like, put my face in there? There's, like, a high level of curiosity about the tech. You will be made fun of if you do virtual reality in public, because you look really ridiculous.
You look goofy.
Right.
Absolutely.
So it's super fun to take this stuff out to those situations.
Have you ever, like, walked through the mall with the pass-through?
Oh, dear God, no.
Just to
And the
see?
pass-through is mono, so you can't see depth. So it's kind of fun if you're like
right.
looking for your popcorn or your soda or your beer or something, but like if you try to walk around, you're gonna trip on things. And everyone is always like, "How have you?" Okay, I was like, "Oh, it's the bathroom question." They're like, yeah, have you ever been like VRing in the bathroom? And I mean,
Sure.
for science,
Yeah.
you have to try it.
Yeah.
It is, your body will not, let's say the word vacate.
Right.
If your brain thinks you're in a movie theater and other people might walk in, it's like, no, I'm sorry. I cannot,
You know what?
I can't have a bowel movement here.
Good on the body.
Yeah, it's just like, this doesn't seem right.
Good on the body.
And yeah, and it's like those
know
are the
what?
weird things you discover.
That inherent mental capability is what keeps us all from embarrassing ourselves every day, right?
But it's,
No, I should wait.
I can't.
I should wait.
I can't. So it's all of these weird situations with the virtual reality that you get when it's portable that are just so odd, and people are kind of learning as they go.
So yeah, somebody in the chat said that they needed like a do not disturb light, like a blinking light, something that says like, I imagine in your house, have people come up behind you when you're on VR and startled you, or you're swinging around and you knock a kid out or something with the controller?
And we use, when I'm like in the Vive and I'm playing with friends or family and we're taking turns with it, I use like heavy duty ear cans that block everything out. So you are completely immersed.
Right.
And as it stands, there is no good way to get someone's attention. And it's really hard to describe how off-putting it is to completely believe you're in a situation and feel a ghost grab you. Like, imagine right now someone grabbing your shoulders and pulling you a step backward.
Right.
You would panic. And that happens every time someone tries to get you out of virtual reality. The Gear VR actually links up, if your phone is linked up to your Facebook accounts, you'll get notifications that way. So if I'm in the Gear VR and I'm watching a movie, I just tell my wife to get on Facebook Messenger.
Yeah.
And it'll, like, a picture of her will pop up and it'll say, hey, can you take out the garbage? And yeah, and then you can, in the retail version of the Vive will,
I thought they said it was going to support notifications.
yeah, they haven't pushed this out to people with pre's yet, but it's
Okay.
going to launch with the hardware.
It'll Bluetooth sync with your phone, and it
Yeah.
will send notifications about emails and stuff like that, and
So
text
you
messages.
can get text messages or
Yeah.
calls, and like I
Yeah,
could
that's what he did
see
tell me that, yeah.
being in a situation where someone is like 5 feet away watching you in VR, and the easiest thing to do is just text. You'd be like, "Hey, jump out."
Hey, hello. Yeah.
And there's a front-facing camera on the Pre that's going to be on the retail version, where it's not functional yet, but if you tap the bottom button twice, it brings up like a Tron version of your surroundings, so you can look around, and it fakes 3D really well.
Okay.
I remember
Because the Vive has a front-facing.
Yeah.
The Rift currently does not.
No, it doesn't.
So this is the only one that offers that capability. Okay.
And it's really... Currently, they have the Chaperone program. If you go to the edge of your tracked space, you'll get just a very basic wireframe wall.
Like grid of...
Yeah, that kind of fades in, and you're like, okay, I have to turn around, and then it fades out, move away from it. So there will be in the retail version even more ways to contact someone in VR.
Let me see the box you brought there. This is the... What do they call this?
This is the Lighthouse tracking unit. And you get 2 of these with, this is the Vive Pre version of it, so the retail version will probably look a little bit different. You plug it into the power outlet. There's like a connector that connects both that we needed for the dev kit that is not necessary on this. So you just plug this into the wall, and you have to have one on each of the opposite walls. So almost like if you cut a diagonal
through a box, essentially.
Those are where your sensors need to be. And there is a standard mount on the back and the bottom.
On it. Yep.
Yeah. So I just went onto a photography website and bought 7-foot just speaker stands, basically.
Yeah, like those light pole things as well.
Exactly, with the mounting hardware. It was $20 for both of them, and then I just screw it in, I ratchet it up, point it down a little bit. With the Pre, you get a variety of mounting mechanisms, including like 3M tape, where you can drill it directly into your wall. But
and I think they said like the configuration of this is completely, it does it all on its own now. I think I was talking with Ryan at HTC, talking about you can put one on a bookshelf and you can put one up there. They don't have to be the same heights anymore. They self-calibrate, which I think if I were to pick one kind of prevailing difference between the two PC platforms, the Vive and the Rift, it would be that people assume that the Vive is going to require more space. This is a room-based VR, whereas the Rift is sitting in your chair or standing in a specific location VR. Now, my understanding is the Vive will work just fine if you're standing or sitting in a chair, right? Like it will function the same. You just get the capability to expand into whole room VR.
And my space is like 9 feet by 9 feet. The maximum is 15 by 15. I just happen to have the amount of space you get for living in Ohio. That's kind of one of the trade-offs.
Yeah, the same thing in Kentucky, right?
It's like
I would block off a whole room for VR, and it will cost way less than people who live in California.
I send pictures of my setup to other people who work for Vox Media who live in like New York and San Francisco, and they think the most science fiction aspect of it is the size of my basement.
Nice.
It's like people shouldn't be allowed to have that. What do you just have tennis matches? I'm like, no, Ohio.
Basements.
We get space. Yeah. So, and I talk to a lot of developers, and even on games where you can walk around a lot, most of them are offering versions of the game or the ability to play in like a 1 meter by 1 meter.
Yeah.
Which is like, some people call it phone booth scale VR. I just call it standing VR.
Yeah.
If you can stand up, hold your hand out, and spin 360 degrees without knocking anything down, you can play probably 80% of these games.
Okay.
And then as you get more space, it just gets a little cooler because you can walk around and there's a game called Hover Junkers where you have like this giant floating warship and set up like defenses around the whole ship, and then you have to actually walk around, and when someone's firing at you, you have to duck down, and then you kind of have to reach around with your gun and return fire or pop up and shoot both guns and then pop down. And it uses the entirety of the space.
Yeah.
So when someone's attacking you from the rear of your ship and you have to actually take like 2 big steps and then dive for cover and then pop up with your shotguns, it feels so physical and immediate, and it's so affecting. You feel like you're in like a Hollywood-style shootout. And then since it affects the head and the hands, and they have this great animation back end. So like if I'm the character of the robot. Everything is animated on the fly. So when I like celebrate with this, like my robot moves exactly like I would. You can give it like a little Cabbage Patch, or the push to talk for the voice over IP is you squeeze the controller, and that also makes you do the middle finger. So whenever you're talking to someone, you're like, hey, what are you doing over there?
Nice.
Hey, what's going on over here? It's like they linked that just for fun, because the nonverbal stuff is so important in that game. It's interesting.
you think about the pricing of these units? Vive being $799, Rift $599. We've talked about the Gear VR and it kind of being a good value for somebody if you already have the phone. If you don't have the phone, it's not a good value to just like do that for that purpose.
Unless you're really into VR, you might want to stay away from Samsung phones just for Gear VR.
Right.
That being said, I think they make a really good phone, and the VR is a selling point.
Right.
So I'm not going to judge people who decide to go that route.
Sure. If you had a decision between an LG and a Samsung, you're like, well, I kind of want to try Gear VR, then boom, done.
Especially
that's
since
what they want.
There's so many giveaways with it.
Yeah.
I would love to see. I want to see Google actually get into the hardware and offer a Gear VR headset. One of the things that I've talked to Samsung and I've talked to Oculus, it's possible to do very, very good VR through the Gear VR because Samsung gave Oculus access, like all the way down into the phone. So when Carmack was coding the SDK for the Gear VR, he has way more access to the hardware than most people who make apps do.
Right.
And in fact, Carmack said one of the challenges is like, we can get great graphics, but I will physically melt your phone in like 30 seconds. Like they have to be so aware of power and heat before they kill it.
Right.
But they have the ability to do that sort of thing because they're so close to the hardware. I would love for Google to create a Gear VR alternative and give those hooks into Android in the next update. So you don't have to wait for companies like Samsung to say, okay, that's okay. It's Android wide that you have a little bit more hooks in the processor and the GPU and everything. But yeah, pricing is an issue. If you don't have a phone, this isn't a $100 piece of hardware. This is an $800 piece of hardware starting from scratch.
Right.
You happen to get a nice phone with it, but it's an $800 solution. Vive is $800. Rift is $600. And you need a very expensive PC to run it. This is not inexpensive or mainstream technology yet because the initial ask is so high.
Yeah.
But when I invite friends and family over to try the Vive and like give them a really good demo and let them adjust it and let them get comfortable, like Tilt Brush, which is it's like a 3D thing where you paint with light.
It's so cool, and I have no artistic capability at all.
Yeah,
and it's great.
And you can the other thing I just realized, you can upload the things you create in .tilt files. So when like professional artists create these amazing, and it's not even a picture, it's in 3D, so it's a scene. Someone who does games did a log cabin. So I downloaded the tilt file, loaded up the program, and I could walk around their log cabin. It was an environment. So when I show people things like this, and they go, oh, $800, like I'm not, that's a little bit too much. I think what HTC Valve and Oculus or Facebook want to do is plant those seeds. If you're into things like Tilt Brush and into the Vive or into the Gear VR, and you go, this is going to be great when the hardware is less expensive, or I can get a Rift for $300. They want to make sure that when they're able to get the price to mainstream and the cost of the GPU hitting that spec goes down, they have you. I think 2016 is going to be a lot of enthusiasts and press and early adopters jumping into VR, inviting friends and family over to try it, and then later on when the price goes down, then kind of that mainstream circle.
That seems to make sense. That's how when people have complained about the pricing of these items, I consider it like it's a super high-end GPU. If you wait 2 years, all of the technology in that product will be in a modest cost thing. And that's kind of the price you pay to be the bleeding edge guy, whether that be on displays or PC hardware or TVs or consumer electronics, whatever it happens to be. And so I wasn't shocked by the $600 and the $800 price tag necessarily, especially since I have done the demos, many of them, right, and seen it. This is actually really cool. This is actually really, really good, right? So when I went on and did the pre-order for the Vive, I was like, yep, okay. Obviously, we do it anyway because cost of doing business for what we're doing, but that would still be a thing. And
it's so hard to explain it to people who haven't tried it because $800 is a ton of money. The $1,000 PC on up is a ton of money. This is not inexpensive stuff. But on the flip side, it's like I go downstairs every night and basically go into my holodeck where I get to shoot zombies in the head with a gun that feels very real.
Yeah.
It's a holodeck. If you just walked up to someone without mentioning Vive or virtual reality and said, how much pay for a holodeck.
I'd pay more than $1,000.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like once people start seeing what it can do and how impressive it is, whether it's the Rift or the Vive or the Gear, they're gonna buy it. Like, I think the experience really sells itself. The price does need to come down.
It will. It does, and it will. It will. I'm gonna get you out of here on this. What so far in any platform, whatever, has been your favorite VR experience that you've had?
Oh gosh.
And I know that's putting you on the spot, but
there's so many good ones, and I forget who it was on Twitter. They said they have a laugh test in VR, because when you're really, really impressed and you think and you're filled with wonder at something, this is very strange, you laugh. Mm-hmm. So when you go into a haunted house and you're really, really scared and your adrenaline spikes and you go out, you laugh. When you go to Disney World and you walk in and you see the big tower, and if you're a Disney geek like I am, you laugh. Kind of overcome a little bit. When you get into experiences that are otherworldly, you release the tension by laughing. So when someone plays a demo and they laugh, it won. That's like, okay, they're in it. They're like so overcome, they laugh. It's the laugh test. And I think Tilt Brush does that. That sense of like, you are painting with light, and it does have an ambient lighting effect where it shines on things, and you can create things that feel physical and then walk around it. Hover junkers, where you play online for like an hour and you're piloting this like floating ship in a Mad Max world, and then to reload your guns, you have to dump the revolver, do a circle motion on the trackpad to put a round in each chamber, and then you flip it to close it. And then once you get that where you're dual wielding and you can do it quickly, and then you flip and then you pop out and offload on someone, it feels real. So when you watch movies and you're like, how well would I actually do in this situation? And how creative could I be with popping up from the side or even laying on your back and shooting like behind you and towards something?
Right.
And it's interesting where even holding your hand out ready, looking for a target for like 5 minutes, these aren't heavy controls. Your arm gets tired.
Yeah.
And then if you put your arms down, you're not as ready and your reaction time goes up. So your physical limits actually become gameplay.
Oh no.
when you pop up and down, I'm sitting here doing like, I'm doing squats. Like I can feel it in my leg muscles. So I think Tilt Brush is the best thing to show people early, and things like hover, where you're playing a game, it's online and it's really intense. That shows just how much interaction you can get with the motion controls and the Lighthouse setup in your house, and it's
very cool.
It's so impressive.
Very cool. So if people want to follow you and find the stuff that you're writing about VR, where should they go?
You can follow me on Twitter at Ben Kuchera. That's Kuchera, Ben, how it sounds. All my stories pop up at Polygon.
All right, sounds good. So we're gonna take a break here. We're gonna swap back over to Sebastian here in a bit and get an update. It looks like he's made progress. And I'll be back here. We'll move on to the next. We've got a contest here coming up as well. Ben, thank you for coming out.
Thank you
for driving down to the state of Kentucky.
Absolutely.
For an event. And then we'll see you probably later this week as well to work on some other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be great.
Cool. Thanks.
Right. Thanks so much.
If you enjoyed this content, consider supporting in-depth technical content by contributing at patreon.com/PCPer.